Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel. Today we'll be doing a review of the Brisbane Test, the second Test match of the Ashes series. Just talking through the main talking points and sort of looking forward for the rest of the Ashes series. Of course, if you don't know what's happened up to now, as a cricket fan, where have you been? But it's Australia are 2-0 up. The sort of betting odds would have probably been in that favour with Perth and Brisbane, a pink ball Brisbane Test for that matter, all wrapped up into a game. I think everyone would have probably suspected this might be the case, apart from the most optimistic of England fans, or a lot of England fans, because I think that was the unique thing about this Test series, was that a lot of England fans came with a unique sense of optimism. Usually when we come down to Australia, it's a bit of a sense of dread, like walking into a slaughterhouse sort of thing. And the sort of false promise, if you will, of a bazball team kind of made people get quite excited. Without losing myself in kind of a long rant or a long chat, I could talk about bazball for a long time. We'll kind of try and stay focused on the Brisbane route test and sort of what happened there, and sort of talking through what's going on. We'll be doing another whole episode coming up, kind of previewing the rest of the series into Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney, but for now, we're just going to be reviewing the Gabbatoire and what happened there. I'm going to be jumping around a bit. I've obviously trying to keep myself within some things I've like jotted down, but it'll be going for 2 and 4. But we'll start with a positive thing again for England fans. England batted first. It feels again a long time ago now, and Joe Root got 100 in Australia. I think it's a big enough talking point to just go in and talk about it from the up, and especially as England fans, maybe just a nice thing to calm ourselves into a review of a traumatic experience, which is most Test matches in Australia. But Joe Root again proved all the haters wrong in Australia. I think he batted so well, and I think in many ways a wider thing you could talk about is almost how good he has been in the last 3 years has really propped up this bazball batting setup in a way. And I think that's a kind of interesting point you can get into, because I think if you look at his numbers in the last 3 years under bazball, it's been clear it was the perfect thing for him to get him out of the kind of rut and the psychology he'd been in around batting, clearly, whilst he'd been captain. And taking all the pressure off and all of these things has really helped him. And another thing he spoke about is obviously the tactical side of it, is that, Brendan McCullum, his focus is a lot more on the tactical side than the technical side, which is interesting, because I think a lot of England cricket fans and pundits suggest that therefore there's a lot of batters who don't focus enough on their techniques, and their techniques get worse and worse, and cricket techniques always a bit of sharpening. Whereas for Joe Root specifically, he'd always been so technique focused, it was actually exactly what he needed, was to be told, think about the tactical side of it, all of the problem solving mechanics that batters have to go through. And I think Brisbane was a kind of perfect example of that. He was problem solving. He came in super early. Duckett and Pope were out early, and he had to bat well. And he was batting with Zach Crawley. Again, I guess another person we could talk as a slight positive from day one, where the positives kind of started and ended for England in Brisbane. But, Zach Crawley did do all the things that people hope and expect from him in Australia, and do all the things that he can do well in Australia. That's a nice sort of element to look at it. Joe Root, 40th Test match 100. It was a massive moment for him and a massive moment for his career, really. I think, honestly, it will be looked back on, regardless if this series ends 5-0, it'll be a really big deal for just his career and his legacy, which I guess is why it was made such a big thing in the Australian media and the English media, but more so the Australian media, because I think things like legacy and where people stack up in an all-time kind of list kind of matters there, and I kind of respect that. It's kind of a bit of they have to almost prove to themselves that this pantheon great could sort of sit on the table with some of their great players in Australia, and because they're a very proud cricketing nation, so I totally get that in a way. But sort of continuing on with the test, it's where it started going well. England sort of ended quite quickly on day 2, start of day 2 at least. Jofra hitting that massive pull shot down to Marnus Labuschagne and him taking that great catch. I think that that's when the momentum changed, and I think simply put, Australia never really gave it back from that point onwards. I think they just showed their tactical astuteness. And speaking of like Brendan McCullum focusing on the tactical aspect, but I think they were willing to just bat the kind of clever way, and they took on their bowling very aggressively, really, in that day 2 when the pitch was good. And that it was hot and sunny in the middle of the day, and they could be aggressive and they could put away bad bowling. And they just batted properly, batted as you should, absorbed pressure when they needed to. But the reality is England didn't really put them under pressure for long enough periods of time for them to, really need to worry. And their batters are good enough batters that they could go through on a good pitch. The reality is a lot of England batters on day one kind of gave it away and didn't sort of cash in on a very good pitch in Brisbane. I think everyone could accept that. And Australians obviously scored 500. I think where the game changed, I think day two, England obviously put themselves out of it massively with the drop catches near the end of the day. But where Australia kind of won it for me as a test match was the day three batting. So they finished day two, I think like 370 for six, which again, with all the drop catches that had happened, it should have been a much closer end of day two. I think Australia were well on top on day two. But when sort of as an England fan, by day three, you'd seen through sort of getting bits of sleep here and there, but basically seeing the Australians had kind of built this very slowly built up on their lead and basically battered just when it was nice. On day three, surface is still good, sun's baking down on you, and it's difficult to get any wickets and movement with that pink ball. And they just battered and battered and battered and battered until it got closer and closer and closer to when they'd be using the new ball under the lights or in that twilight period, because that's often when they talk about being the best time to kind of bowl and get wickets is when that light was fading in the pink ball. And Australia just did that to perfection. And what did it happen when England were put under the smallest bit of pressure? They totally collapsed. And in that day three evening session is where they lost the test match. I think a lot of hyperbolic England fans would maybe say that day three was kind of where they lost the test series, because coming back from 2-0 seems so unlikely. I think that, is hyperbolic. But again, I think it's not unfair to suggest it's almost 100% unlikely that England will win from where they are. But that maybe is a matter for another video. I'm going to stay away from the kind of existential crisis of an England fan. But I think the drops were on that day two to reverse a bit, because everyone knows that Australia won the test match, and in day four it was all a bit of a foregone conclusion, as I kept saying in my little day review of it. But I think the pink ball drops and the drop catches under pressure and whilst tired at the end of the day couldn't be a much more textbook sign of under preparation for this England team. Like, they were dropping absolute sitters under lights with a pink ball whilst being a bit tired near the end of the day. And if that doesn't seem like physically not prepared enough, catching not prepared enough, and psychologically not prepared enough, just dropping basic catches as test match cricketers, I don't know what else you can point towards that. And I think that's why, as England fans, something like, the thing that Brendan McCullum said sticks in the throat so much, is like they trained too much. I just think that's such a ridiculous thing to say as a test match cricketer or test match coach. And I think that's why obviously he's losing fans so rapidly, Brendan McCullum in England, is because of the kind of what seem like just weird excuses, kind of making out as if training too little as professional cricket, too much, as professional cricketers would be a bad thing, especially when your kind of whole ethos is taking the pressure off and all the things. It's like, it's okay to train hard and take pressure off. Like, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Anyway, again, I'm trying to keep myself from sort of falling into a bit of a rabbit hole of ranting about bazball. And I'm trying to focus on the positives from the first to second test that we can do. And again, there's not much for England fans, but obviously Joe Root's 100. And I think the other one is with Will Jacks. Obviously he took one of the great catches, Marnus Labuschagne's great catch, and Will Jacks' to get Steve Smith out was one of the other great moments of the test match. But he also bowled pretty well when he got asked to. And he kind of was one of the batters who really applied himself. Obviously, in that second innings, he batted with Ben Stokes for the only session where we hadn't lost a wicket in this series. They got like 50 for naught in that morning session on day four. So I think he was a really good selection, basically. I think they went with him, not Bashir. Bashir at the same time was playing in an Australia A match and got hit for 25 overs, 130 for naught, whereas Will Jacks was bowling in a test match. Didn't bowl very much, admittedly, but he got a wicket and he bowled fairly well by the looks of it. I remember Nathan Lyon had a reaction to a ball he bowled at one point and was very annoyed and animated, as he was kind of throughout a lot of the test match. Which is, again, a matter we'll get onto with the sort of Australian aspects of the first two test matches or the test match in Brisbane. But I think, honestly, it's weird to say we're 2-0 down, but I think England have actually got their selection right in the first two test matches. I think it made sense doing the 5-seamers in Perth with how the pitch played, how the Optus has played, and how underbaked England were in a way. Like, the only way they could have won that test match, I think, in my opinion, was kind of almost blitzing the Australians with that pace, and it didn't work. Maybe not the only way. I think England fans might get at me for that. I think there's obviously more textbook ways of you can win a Test match than how they did, but they got the selection right, in my opinion, in Perth within the realms of the squad they already had. To be clear, I've already said the squad I'm not a huge fan of. I've said that in many other videos. But in Test 2, Wood obviously had to get dropped, and it was a bit of a who do they go with? Do they go with another pace bowler? Do they go 5-seamers again? But they went with Will Jacks, and I think his extra batting and his bowling looked good. I think his bowling looks better than Bashir's does, especially on Australia. And again, I can list off the stats for you of Bashir bowling on Australia since he's kind of become the he'll be good in Australia card. They're so bad. And it's just a case of he's 23 as an off spinner and he's just not ready, and that's fine, but he isn't ready. So if they throw him in, and I think they will between now and Sydney, Bashir will play. I think there's a good chance it could be like a bloodbath. If anyone remembers, was it Simon Kerrigan? I think he got one Test match, Simon Kerrigan, and he just got absolutely panned around in a Test match. I think in Australia, it's very possible that Bashir could have that happen, especially if it's a good surface on a first innings situation. Anyway, I'm going to try and kind of keep on the positives of both sides, and then we can work a little bit. But with Australia, again, it's 2-0. They have a lot of positives to pick from. I think the things that I picked out of it is just the tactical now stuff, like the batting at the time of the day. I think on day 4 was day 3. Sorry, was such a sign of just being an altogether well-made Test match unit and a well put together team. And I just don't think England are at this point, or can do in conditions where they don't have a massive control over, because again, Bazball has a lot of control over the pitches that they've scored a lot of these runs on and had great chases on, and all of these things. They've had control of them. They wanted fast, hard wickets, which is not what you get pretty much anywhere. And Bazball has done very well at home and in Pakistan, and a bit in New Zealand, obviously. So, whereas Australia, sorry, I'm getting lost in attacking Bazball. Even when I'm trying to talk about Australia, you have to mind the fact that we're England fans in the middle of the Ashes, whilst just all our worst fears are coming true. So it's triggering, for lack of a better word. But Australia have always been such a hyper focus on winning, especially at home. And they just won't give you a Test match. They won't give you a Test series, certainly not in Australia. And in a pink ball Test match, Australia just have the preparation. They've done the pink ball Test matches so much, so they know how it works. And they just proved it so methodically. On day 2, they absolutely blitzed England as well, by the way. I'm not saying it's like they're not better players. I think it's so obvious at the moment that Australia is a better Test match team than England at points. So that is an unspoken, unneeded mention. But Australia have also just out-tacticked England at every single discernible point throughout the series. And I think that is another thing which you have to give Australians credit for. And again, speaking of selection, I think Will Jacks was the right selection. I mean, you couldn't have been more vindicated in your selection with how Michael Neser bowled in that second innings. He got the massive wickets. He got 5 wickets. Michael Neser is like, if you were playing who you expect to be a big factor at the Brisbane Test, second Test match at any point of the last 2 years, Australians probably would not have guessed Michael Neser. But he is a brilliant cricketer, Michael Neser. He's an excellent batsman who averages in the 30s with the bat. And as a bowler, he has just been a proven performer in red ball cricket. And again, it was a pink ball Test, I know, but in red ball cricket for a hell of a long time. He's played in first-class cricket in Australia, obviously ages for Queensland, so he knows Brisbane very well and he knows how to bowl in those conditions. But he's also played seasons and seasons of county cricket at Glamorgan. So he's just played a lot of 4-day cricket. And in my opinion, that has so much value in just being consistent as a bowler and knowing the lengths and lines to bowl. And he got proven right, because what do the England team struggle against is the nagging lengths, consistent line and length, and consistent bowling on pitches which offer you a little bit. So if you are consistent, and again against a team who aren't that willing to wait, you will eventually get rewarded. And he just kept doing it. And of course, Alex Carey has to get massive credit, because of course the way they were trying to negate him was come down the track. And what did Alex Carey do? Stood up to stumps. I think a lot of people have misplaced the fact that Alex Carey stood up to stumps as proof to bash Bazball that medium paces do work. Calling Michael Neser a medium pacer, even at this stage of his career, would be wrong, in my opinion, simply put. He still bowls a sort of, to Australians, a sort of 135 kph. To an English person who works in miles an hour, that's kind of in that mid to low 80s. But to stand up at a prolonged period of time in a pink ball test match under the lights and keep to that, and I mean, I can't remember him making a massive mistake, Alex Carey. And he just made Michael Neser's job so much easier, and it worked so well. And what did they go about to do? He was sort of the game-winning bowler in the end. I mean, no, not game-winning, of course. Mitchell Starc was unbelievable, as he always is, with a pink ball in hand. But when he was selected over Nathan Lyon, and I think there was so much confusion, and obviously on Nathan Lyon's point, there was a lot of anger of just like, why have I been dropped? I don't deserve to be dropped, and it was such a long streak, and all of these things. And the person they dropped him for was Michael Neser, and I don't know for sure, but I think he's like 33, 34. It was super interesting in a way, and it was just a case of how do you go about sort of picking your replacement players? And the simple thing was they picked their replacement player from a guy who was discernibly sort of, for English cricket coaching or cricket selection, would be sort of past it. He wouldn't be of the age where England would be picking him. So it was a very interesting one for me, and I think it was a big moment for sort of England cricket fans, was seeing that Australia were picking a guy in his 30s, his third Test match, and guess what he did? He won them the Test match. I mean, again, saying he won them the Test match is an overstatement. Of course, all the other factors that I'm bringing into play, but I just think it was a case of something that I'm very passionate about. Is that I think England give up on players almost a bit early, and the age factor is very frustrating. And I think that's where the Michael Neser selection is such a clever one from Australia. And I think English people or English fans like myself would be frustrated by is there is such a willingness to actually select players who are probably just at the best that they're going to be, or that they're about to drop off, maybe. Because cricket's that fine line, I think, is that where obviously the physicality aspect is so important, and you see players who just get to a point and they need to retire, or they're no longer going to be looked at for selection from their country. There's also often that branded sort of players who are just actually getting to their best skill-wise, batting, bowling, all of these things, and the physical stuff is still there. So Michael Neser being a perfect example, and they don't actually get selected when they're probably at their best. So I think Australia needed a player for a second Test match against England in a huge series. Hazelwood was out, Cummins still out. And they thought, who's actually going to get us wickets? Who's actually going to help us right this second, rather than thinking about who's the best players for England sort of whimsically in the future. I think that's why England's selection policy over the last few years have frustrated me. And I think maybe other England fans would be the same, and the same with the England Lions. And I go on about the England Lions a lot. But the fact that they don't select players who are actually even close to ready for Test match cricket, and I'd argue are far from being ready for England Lions cricket, they give them opportunities in these really big series, and then there's this sort of drop off between your best players, who you probably are your best 11 for England, but again still questionable, and then there's a big drop off in the squad, which is also there. So that's why Mark Woods has been dropped, and we've got Matthew Fisher coming in. Admittedly, Matthew Fisher falls into that profile of nearer 30 and maybe closer to maybe closer to the sort of end of his career than the start of it. But I still think it's just players who maybe aren't up to that same standard. And again, maybe that's my harsh view on it, and maybe just because when it doesn't work, it's really obvious. But I think that selection pick from Australia was just so ballsy. I think that more than anything, like dropping Nathan Lyon after, what was it, 12 years, 13 years, I could be making that year amount up, but playing in Test matches at home is a remarkable feat, and he's also one of the best Test match bowlers in the last sort of 20 years, or maybe more, 10 years. I mean, still 20 years, just because of the breadth of his record and the how long he's played for. It can't be understated how impressive he's been. So I think Australia, at the end of the day, it's very easy, again, as England fans, to maybe focus in on all the things that England did wrong. But I think it's actually, sometimes you've got to be realising that you are playing one of the best Test match teams in the world, in their home venue, in the series, that as much as they might, fans of their team might sort of diminish at this point, it's still, for Australians, they want to smash English players and bombs and all of that. And why not? I can understand it. Any team that plays England in any sport, for that matter, I kind of can understand. So, England always have to step up their game when they're playing maybe abroad and all of these things. And especially with all the noise that came with bazball. As much as, again, it wasn't really noise that they created, it stirred up and it riled up Australians. I mean, nothing could be more clear than that. Throughout this series, as even they're 2-0 up, and bazball still, even the mention of bazball to Australian cricket fans seems to make them want to scream from the rooftops. And I get it. But to be fair, it's an interesting sense that it still riles people up that much, even when they're smashing bazball, and they're just like, it's sort of falling apart at the seams in a way. I think that's a whole, again, a whole nother matter. But yeah, going back to sort of Brisbane Test and where I guess it was won and lost, I think it's the simple things, like the simple just cricketing principles of Test match cricket were found to be true again. And I think I created a short, and it was part of a longer format that I did for Perth, about the kind of new style versus old style. And I think it's just remained to be true, in the sense of, basically, the old style that I'm talking about is just that Test match cricket being played like a Test match, and it just being played like, this is the format we're playing, and we're going to use the format to our advantage. So the batting slowly in the middle of the day so you can bowl in the twilight period is exactly that. I don't think, and maybe I'm being harsh on England here, but I think it's been proven to be true, I don't think in the reverse situation England would have done that, or maybe they wouldn't have done that as well, or applied themselves to it as much. I just can't imagine Bryden Cast, who's probably a better batter technically than a Scott Boland. I can't see Bryden Cast getting 20 off 72. But he's got the technical ability to do it. I think he's got the fortitude to do it, but he's not, like, anytime he's come up to bat, it's just been like swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Gus Atkinson the same. Gus hasn't got a Test 100. I mean, I remember when he was playing that innings, everyone was like, Gus Atkinson had this in his bag this whole time, but no one knew. But now every time he's going out to bat, it's like the last 5 balls of the T20. And I get that, like, let your low order players play. But in a situation where you can do what the Australians did, and they were on top, and they just slammed on the brakes, waited until they could bowl again when it was proper conditions, just to ensure that England had no chance. Like, there was no chance of a bazball day not under the lights, where they did go really aggressive and it did all work out. Because, again, it can happen. It does happen, as much as, again, it's impossible to remember, it feels like, as England fans. Even on fairly difficult surfaces, England have scored, like, runs quickly. I mean, in New Zealand is a very good example of that. Harry Brook did very well, and various England players did very well. But Australia just didn't let them by batting really cleverly. And again, Mitchell Starc is a good example. He's usually a very free-flowing sort of low-order player who, when he's on, and he'll strike rate at around 100, because he's boundary scoring and all of those things. But what did he get? 77 off like 150 balls? Not as slow as Boland, because he's the better batter, so he was always going to be able to score more runs. But they just stayed in. They just batted. They batted. Ironically, that's what Jackson Stokes did in day 4 when the game was lost. And then, if maybe to add to the irony, they both kind of got out when they were both set. So, I mean, I think Jax was out for 41 off 97, and Stokes was out 51 off 150, say. Those are rough estimates. I don't have the scorecard in front of me. But they both then actually got out when they had kind of got in and done the hard yards, if you will. I think it's just the case of, like, Australia just doing the simple things well, whilst also probably being a better pound-for-pound side than England, and sort of vice versa. England are sort of trying to outdo the fact that they may not be on the same level as Australia by just doing everything to the 1,000% and way over the top, and thinking that's the only way to win. And maybe there is some truth in that. Maybe if England just try and play Australia in Australia, straight up and down, like Test match cricket, England lose more often than they don't. Maybe that is true. But I think as England fans, it'd be easier to take than against a team that is better than you, just seemingly always just giving it away. Again, who knows? It'll be an interesting one to see how it plays out. There'll be another episode of this dropping quite soon, or not this dropping soon. I'm going to be having a preview for the last 3 Test matches. I'm actually lucky enough to be going out to Australia, kind of sort of related, unrelated. My sister lives out there, my brother-in-law lives out there, so we're going there for Christmas. So it'll be the last sort of series, like podcast I'll do before heading out, and that'll be with Liam Before Wicket, which will be a nice, exciting record. Coming up, but we'll be previewing the last 3 Test matches and just sort of looking forward to what's going on there. But this has been a sort of Brisbane review, and I hope you've really enjoyed it. And if you're still watching at this point, leave a like, comment, subscribe. I see all the comments. I love responding to them, even if they are Australians doing very well at annoying me. But even still, I love people interacting, and people getting into the content has been really, really good. So subscribe, follow, all of that good stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.